This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library
enough, you can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price you can get Truefire All Access for.
You may or may not have seen that there's been some sort of rumblings around G L guitars. The problem here is that this is about the most I've heard anyone talk about G L guitars in quite some time. I think that is kind of indicative of what the real problem is here. So I've named this video, we need to talk about G L guitars, because I think that is really the crux of the problem. I'm going to get into in this video a little bit of my history with G L guitars. I've owned 3 over the years. It's a little bit too late in some regards, and I think also how this illustrates a bunch of things about the importance of, you know, Leo Fender, but the importance of actually being tied to the Fender brand in order to have any level of like success at all, or Gibson. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but in the comments below, feel free to share your experiences with G L guitars, whether it's the tributes or the actual G L guitars, and let's talk about it a bit. My history with G L guitars, also, if you've not seen what is going on, essentially RhettShull has probably got a very good video on this, about the downfall of G L guitars. Basically, he's done some research looking through some forums. Looks like some previous employees have talked about what's happening, as well as, you know, I think it was a Facebook page where essentially, like, I think people have not been getting paid for a while. There's rumours of that, as well as sudden furlough. So, of course, for the folks working there, of course, you'd hope that someone, and this is the other thing that's been speculated, that maybe Fender have bought them. To me, and we'll get into why I think this is, I don't see that you would need to buy G L if you're Fender. And the reason for that is that I think, if you think about Musicman and G L, these are 2 brands that are relatively small brands, right? And I think Musicman have actually probably done a little better once they got away from the Fender connection than anything else. I think Musicman today is better known for its association with people like John Petrucci, not at all, you know, a classic sort of Fender guy, or I mean, Albert Lee would have been, you know, your textbook sort of Fender guy, but that guitar looks really nothing like a Fender. You know, Steve Morse. Some of these players, like, I think Musicman actually did better, or does better as a brand, when it gets away from, like, the Fender legacy, which is kind of, I think, the interesting part here. So what I think really illustrates this quite clearly to me is that Fender with John Cruz, like a Fender John Cruz master-built guitar, is absolutely like the holy grail thing, right? Of the master builders, or it was at one stage. John Cruz got dropped from Fender because of some tweets, I think it was, and then started his own sort of boutique guitar building business, and was not able to really sustain that. Now, I don't know exactly the details of what happened there, but it kind of fizzled out. And I think that shows to me that it's more difficult than any of us really know to start a brand and get these things off the ground in general. I think that's why we should celebrate like PRS, because that's like one example of a big success story in the shadow of these giants of guitar building, which are Gibson and which are Fender, which essentially have a monopoly on the market in general, right? And this is, I think, what any other company is up against, is that to get anyone to look at a guitar which is not Gibson or Fender branded is pretty tricky, and such that, you know, when I demo other guitars by other brands that are like Fender similar, you know, you play these guitars like Jet or Sire or Artist guitars, and you think, if this had a Fender brand on it, like, this would be something that would cost 3-4 times as much, you know, and people would be raving about it. But such is the nature of this stuff that if it doesn't say Fender or Gibson on it, you're going to struggle, I think, to get people to pay attention. Now, the G&L thing, basically this was a brand that George Fullerton and Leo Fender started together. George and Leo, that's why it's G&L. The most off-putting thing about the guitars to me are the headstock. So I've owned 3 of them. So I bought, at uni, my mate Pete had a Fender, like a deluxe thing. It had like a roller nut, and it was like a modern sort of take on a Strat. And I liked the sound of that guitar when he was recording. And so I bought a G&L Legacy in vanilla, and it was like a beautiful smelling guitar. That's my one thing that I really remember about that guitar. It smelled awesome. And I played that guitar a lot. It had a really chunky neck, 3 single coils, and the 2-point trem. Now, my memories of that guitar is that it was actually like, compared to an actual Strat, like not as sleek. It was like a bigger body. Everything about it felt a bit bigger. The trem felt a little bit clunkier. Now, these are things that allegedly were kind of improvements on a Fender, but for me personally, when I compared it to the feeling that I get when I play like an actual Strat, the body was a little bit bigger. It was just a little bit clunkier. That's that one G&L that I played. I bought a second one, which was, I think, G&L Legacy. That one had like a sort of, would you call it like Sierra sort of sunburst. Basically same guitar, same specs, but maybe with a rosewood board and bird's eye maple neck. And that one was cool too. And I bought a G&L Tribute, like the Telly with an F-hole, single coil here, and a neck pickup, which was a humbucker. Now at the time, what got me into G&L guitars, and considering trying them, was that A, they were quite cheap at the time, so I could import one from America, I think for around £600-700, so it was like a really cheap way to get like an American-made guitar new. And my guitar teacher at uni, I had a few lessons with Stuart Ryan, Stuart, if you're watching, who had a G&L Blues Boy, so like the ASAP Blues Boy, which was the semi-hollow with a neck pickup and the bridge. And I think I was just influenced by him at the time, kind of saying it was a really good guitar. I think Stuart at this point plays mostly Fender. As good as those guitars might be, it reminds me of the heritage thing with Gibson, where it's just like that you have to do so much work, even if it looks like a Gibson or looks like a Fender, but not quite. You have to change the headstock a little bit. You lose, I think, so much of a potential audience that even if they are cheaper guitars relative and maybe better made guitars than you might get the equivalent made from Fender, it's just not a thing that people are, you know, are going to find out about in general. And if you think of like your favourite G&L guitar player, now the only 2 that I can think of, I just googled it just then and Jerry Cantrell popped up. Another guy, I think the bass player from Everything Everything had an ASAP sort of style bass or a G&L style bass at one point. So that for me is a bit of an area as well, where like if I can't name, or I'm not aware of like any big G&L players, then that is one of the key ways that like these things get marketed. And as much as like Andertons may have done 1 or 2 videos talking about G&L guitars because they stock them, I've not seen like a persistent presence of G&L guitars, even as someone who, you know, in 2007 I think it would have been, I owned one of them still. My very first YouTube upload was with a G&L Legacy, the white guitar. I played a dirty loop solo on it. So they're great guitars. The fact that we haven't really talked about them up to this point is kind of the entire issue, because again, and this is so easy to forget stuff. Like the other day I made a video about the Jet JT350BK, kind of saying I can't think of a better quality guitar under £400. And then I'm thinking in the shower earlier on, well, the artist guitars, what about those? Like, you've already forgotten about these things. It's like so hard to actually keep these things in people's heads because there's so many guitars coming through. The things that people do really remember tend to have like Fender or Gibson on them. So is there like enough space in our brains to remember, oh, there was that G&L brand, or like the countless other sort of, like, they don't have the Leo connection. But again, I don't think so. Rhett was saying in his video that G&L needed to kind of tell their story about the Leo thing better, but I'm not sure actually that some of those improvements that went into like the G&L guitars. So early on they were three bolt neck joins and stuff like that. Like the ones that are built today are actually kind of like a little bit more retro, like go further back along, like closer to what Leo initially came up with at Fender. I don't know that some of the improvements that came along, like the Z coils, I don't know whether those are real improvements. It'd be interesting to see. And in terms of like speculation whether Fender would buy G&L, so apparently Phil McKnight, I saw in Rhett's video, was saying like it's roughly sort of equivalent size to something like the Fender Custom Shop, or maybe something like Sir, I think is around that sort of level. You just think about like how much more prestige is involved in a Fender Custom Shop guitar. Even though probably many of us would think it totally plausible that G&L might be building pound for pound better guitars, you're getting more for your money. Are you someone who would buy a G&L guitar unless there was like a player of yours that you really knew was using these day in, day out? I particularly think the G&L tribute guitars have flown under the radar now, because when those came out, there was a huge splash around them because they were like great specs. This was at a time when maybe you didn't get that sort of guitar that was really well spec'd with, I think, American-made pickups in there as well. But at this point now, you know, there's loads of guitars coming from that part of the world that are, you know, very well regarded. It's just a thing where I think it's just really hard to be at that sort of level where you're not totally boutique. So I think that's a thing. Like, you can, if you have like one or two big players playing your guitars, like whether it's Danocaster or K-Line or Seth Backus, you know, you can be a small operation building like 100 guitars a year or something like that. Nacho guitars, you know, I think that's doable. It's like mass manufacture is another thing where some guitarists can get to, guitar companies can get to be there. But there's this sort of boutique-ish, custom shop-ish level where I think that must be really difficult, where you've got, you know, you're making very high quality instruments, but at like this complicated scale where the price needs to be quite high, but at the same time it's like a brand that people are not as aware of. It's not like a word of mouth, not like a household name brand. I think that's got to be a really, really tricky space to be. And it's interesting to see where G&L might go from here, and whether they've been bought by another company. But to me, if I'm looking for a Fender type guitar, I think I would either go for an actual Fender or for a boutique builder like K-Line, like Danocaster. But I think because we don't talk about G&L in this same sort of way so much, I think potentially a lot of us have missed out on the G&L experience, which is a shame. Anyway, let me know your experience with G&L guitars in the comments, and yeah, hopefully they're doing all right over there. We'll watch.